picture this. You get your blood work back, and your doctor says your iron is low.
Right.
So they hand you a prescription for a supplement. You pick up the pills from the pharmacy, start taking them every morning, and you just sort of assume the problem is solved, right?
Yeah, that's what most people do.
But I mean, not even close. Today, we're taking a deep dive into this really fascinating clinical document about iron deficiency causes. And it proves that a low iron diagnosis isn't just, a simple deficiency.
No, it's definitely not.
It is a flashing red warning light on your biological dashboard.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that ignoring that warning light, just throwing iron pills at the problem, is actually one of the most common mistakes in medicine.
Wow, really?
Yeah. When we look at this clinical document, the overarching theme is that iron deficiency is never a disease in and of itself. Like, it's a symptom. It's this neon sign pointing toward a completely different, hidden condition that is quietly draining your body's resources.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, treating low iron without investigating why it's low is essentially like endlessly bailing water out of a sinking boat without ever bothering to look for the leak.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how to find that leak. We're going to play medical detective alongside the experts today because the culprits, they range from these bizarre dietary quirks to really hidden systemic diseases. So where do we even start looking?
Well, if we are operating on the premise that the boat is leaking, the absolute most logical first step is to look for physical blood loss.
Because iron is in the blood.
Right. Iron is fundamentally tied to your red blood cells. But to appreciate how a leak affects the body, we first have to understand the biological budget we're working with.
The baseline math.
Yeah, the math here is incredibly tight.
I know the document breaks down the baseline math, but give us an idea of what a, normal bank account of iron actually looks like for the average person.
Sure. So a healthy adult typically stores about 5 to 10 milligrams of iron per kilogram of body weight.
Okay.
So if you weigh roughly 70 kilograms, which is about 150 pounds, you have a reserve tank of maybe 350 to 700 milligrams of iron.
That sounds like a decent amount.
It sounds like a lot until you learn the conversion rate. Every single milliliter of blood you lose takes exactly 0.5 milligrams of iron with it.
Oh, wow. So if I'm understanding the math, we're basically operating on a microscopic margin of error.
Very microscopic.
Losing just a couple of teaspoons of blood means a measurable drop in that iron savings account. So a small withdrawal, like, say, donating blood, where you lose maybe 200 milligrams of iron that won't bankrupt you because your body can slowly rebuild that store over weeks.
Right, exactly.
But an ongoing daily subscription fee is going to zero out that account entirely.
Precisely. And that brings us to the overt, obvious leaks. Things like heavy menstrual bleeding, major surgeries, or even regular medical procedures.
What kind of procedure?
For example, patients undergoing hemodialysis for kidney failure. The physical process of filtering their blood through a machine can result in losing up to 2,000 milligrams of iron per year.
Wait, 2,000? That completely eclipses that 700 milligram reserve tank you just mentioned.
It does. It guarantees severe deficiency without aggressive clinical intervention.
Man.
And the same goes for pregnancy. The biological cost of building a placenta, expanding the mother's blood volume, and forming the baby, it requires a massive 1,000 milligrams of iron.
That is an enormous biological withdrawal.
It really is.
But, those seem like known quantities. Dialysis, pregnancy, major surgery. A doctor knows those are happening. I mean, they're obvious.
Right.
So if obvious bleeding is so obvious, why do doctors still miss the cause of iron deficiency in these patients, especially with things like menstrual bleeding? If someone is losing an excessive amount of blood every single month, how is it possible that doctors or even the patients themselves just miss this as the root cause of an iron crash?
It comes down to human psychology, honestly, and adaptability.
How so?
We have this profound tendency to normalize our own chronic conditions. Like, a patient doesn't intuitively know the mathematical volume of blood they're losing.
Sure.
If it has always been heavy, they just assume it's the baseline human experience.
There was a mind-blowing study in the text regarding exactly that.
Yes, the von Willebrand study.
Right. They tracked 56 people who had iron deficiency anemia and heavy menses, and they discovered that 16% of them didn't just have heavy periods, they actually had an undiagnosed underlying genetic bleeding disorder called von Willebrand disease.
Yeah, which is a condition where your blood lacks a specific protein required to make your platelets stick together and form a proper clot.
And the reason these bleeding disorders go undetected for decades is entirely psychological,
Really?
right?
In families with hereditary bleeding disorders, relatives normalize the heavy bleeding because it is literally all they have ever seen.
Right. If your mother, your sister, and your aunt all had incredibly heavy periods, you just assume that's simply what a period is.
You don't realize you have a clinical bleeding disorder. You just think you have the family curse.
Which means a doctor simply asking, is your bleeding normal, is a completely useless diagnostic tool.
Completely useless. The clinician has to ask hyper-specific, quantifiable questions.
Like what?
They need to ask about the exact number of pad or tampon changes per day, the duration of the cycle, the presence of clots. They have to actually calculate the math to see if the visible blood loss matches the invisible iron deficit.
Okay, so we've mapped out the visible leaks.
Yeah.
But what happens when the math still doesn't add up? Like, there are no heavy periods, no recent surgeries, no obvious trauma. The savings account is draining, but there's no record of a withdrawal.
That is when the clinical detective work escalates. Because we had to shift our focus from visible blood loss to occult blood loss.
Occult meaning hidden.
Exactly. Occult in medicine simply means hidden. And the gastrointestinal tract, the stomach, and the intestines is the primary suspect. You can bleed slowly into your digestive tract for years and never see a single drop of it.
The statistics in the clinical text on this are sobering.
They really are.
They looked at a series of 621 adult patients presenting with unexplained iron deficiency, and they found that 16% of them had either cancer or high-risk adenomas hidden inside their GI tract.
And just to clarify what an adenoma is, it's essentially a precancerous polyp.
Okay.
It's a tiny clump of cells on the lining of the colon that has kind of gone rogue. And because these polyps are abnormal, their blood vessels are very fragile.
So they bleed easily.
Exactly. As food and digestive waste brush past them every single day, they get micro tears. They shed a few drops of blood here, a few drops there. Over time, that microscopic hidden bleeding drains your iron tank completely.
Now, if you're listening to this and feeling a bit panicked because you were just told your iron is low, let's take a breath.
Yes, please do.
We aren't saying you definitely have a hidden tumor, but we are saying the medical protocol respects that 16% statistic so much that it triggers a massive biological investigation.
Oh, the clinical guidelines are incredibly strict here. In adult males and in non-menstruating females, if you find iron deficiency, a gastrointestinal source of bleeding is assumed until proven otherwise.
Assumed until proven otherwise. That phrasing is so definitive, it leaves no room for guessing.
It is a mandate. It requires doctors to order a bidirectional endoscopy.
Both ends.
Right. They have to send a camera down the throat into the stomach and another up into the colon to physically inspect the tissue. And crucially, this isn't just a rule for men or postmenopausal women.
Right. The text explicitly states that even menstruating females over the age of 30, or anyone with a family history of GI issues, requires these endoscopies if their iron drops without a clear explanation.
Exactly.
So occult GI bleeding is the primary hidden leak, but the text also explores some incredibly niche, almost unbelievable ways the body can lose iron.
Oh, yeah. Some of the rare causes are wild.
Like, we're talking about conditions like pulmonary hemosiderosis, where you literally shed iron-laden cells directly into your lung tissue.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The extreme athlete connection.
Yes, the physiology of extreme endurance sports is fascinating. The document points out that athletes participating in high-intensity training, like marathon running or intense military boot camps, can actually drain their iron through sweat.
Through sweat.
Yeah, you can lose about 0.6 milligrams of iron for every liter of sweat.
Which adds up quickly if you're running for hours. But the wildest part is something the text calls foot strike hemolysis. Tell me how someone can physically destroy their own red blood cells just by jogging.
It's a mechanical destruction. When you are pounding the pavement for 26 miles, the sheer physical force of your foot striking the ground repeatedly crushes the microscopic capillaries in the soles of your feet.
That is insane.
And the red blood cells inside those capillaries are literally pulverized by your body weight. When the red blood cell membrane ruptures, the iron inside spills out into the blood plasma and is eventually filtered out and lost through your urine.
Wait, hold on. Let's look at this practically. Say I'm a marathon runner in my 40s. I run 50 miles a week, and I'm a vegan, so I don't eat meat. My blood work comes back, and my iron is in the basement. Isn't it completely logical for my doctor to look at me, blame the foot strike hemolysis and the vegan diet, hand me a supplement, and call it a day?
This raises an important question, actually.
Yeah.
It sounds incredibly logical, but doing that could be a fatal error.
Really?
The clinical guidelines specifically warn against that exact scenario.
Hmm.
Even if you have the perfect alibi, you run marathons, you don't eat meat, you sweat heavily, if you fall into that over 40 demographic, a doctor cannot let a plausible excuse mask a potentially deadly diagnosis.
Because of the polyps, the adenomas.
Exactly. The risk of missing an occult GI tumor is simply too high. You cannot assume the tank is empty because of a vegan diet until you have definitively proven that there isn't a hole in the bottom of the boat. You always rule out the worst-case scenario first.
That makes perfect sense. So we've exhausted the leaks, we've looked at the obvious visible bleeding and the hidden microscopic bleeding. But what if there is no leak at all? The tank is completely intact, but the iron levels are still crashing. That leads us to the next phase of the investigation. The pump is broken, the body simply cannot get new cargo on board.
This brings us into the incredibly complex anatomy and chemistry of the upper digestive tract.
Okay.
Because iron doesn't just seep into your body anywhere. It is maximally absorbed in a highly specific location, which is the duodenum. That's the very first section of the small intestine immediately after the stomach.
And from what I read, the duodenum is a hostile work environment. The chemical requirements to absorb iron are ridiculously strict. The text explains that iron doesn't just float into the bloodstream, it has to be chemically prepped.
That's right. Iron has to be conjugated, essentially bound together with vitamin C, specific amino acids, or sugars.
Okay.
But the critical catalyst for this entire reaction is gastric acid. Stomach acid is non-negotiable. It keeps the iron in a soluble chemical state.
What happens if there isn't enough stomach acid? Does the iron just pass through?
It's actually more dramatic than that. If iron isn't bathed in that acidic environment, when it moves down the digestive tract into the jejunum, which has a much more alkaline environment, a rapid chemical reaction occurs.
What kind of reaction?
The iron physically converts into ferric hydroxide.
Which the text helpfully notes is literal rust.
Yes, essentially rust.
That blew my mind. If the acid levels are wrong, your iron supplements are basically rusting inside your intestines into a compound that is impossible for the body to absorb. So wait, if I take antacids every day for heartburn, am I rusting my own iron supply?
Well, we have to add a layer of nuance there.
Okay, fair enough.
While the chemistry of ferric hydroxide is true, a normally functioning digestive tract on standard, over-the-counter antacids usually won't develop clinical iron deficiency just from the medication.
Good to know.
You would really need a severely inadequate diet or a secondary issue compounding it.
Yeah.
The real danger is when doctors blame a prescription antacid like a proton pump inhibitor for the low iron and stop looking for deeper GI pathology.
Because the medication is just a convenient scapegoat.
Exactly.
If we aren't blaming antacids, what actually destroys the body's ability to absorb iron? How does the pump actually break?
The most dramatic example is surgical. Bariatric surgeries, like a gastric bypass, physically reroute your digestive plumbing.
Right.
The surgeons bypass the duodenum entirely and significantly reduce the stomach's acid-producing capabilities. They are physically removing the exact chemical machinery required to process iron.
That makes sense anatomically. But what about invisible damage? The text dives into conditions like H. pylori infections and autoimmune gastritis.
Yeah, those are conditions that launch a microscopic attack on the stomach lining.
Yeah.
Autoimmune gastritis means your own immune system gets confused and starts attacking the parietal cells in your stomach.
And those are the cells that make the acid, right?
The exact cells responsible for manufacturing stomach acid. No cells, no acid. No acid, you get rust.
Wow. But the section that really stopped me in my tracks was about celiac disease.
Oh, absolutely.
The text states that celiac affects roughly 1 in 70 to 1 in 300 white individuals. And they cited a study of 102 celiac patients where a staggering 69% of them had anemia as their primary presenting feature.
To understand why that number is so high, we have to look at how celiac alters the landscape of the intestine.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The inside of your small intestine isn't smooth like a pipe. It is lined with millions of microscopic finger-like tentacles called villi. These villi physically grab nutrients, including iron, and pull them into the bloodstream.
They are the loading dock workers.
Exactly. But when someone with celiac disease eats gluten, their immune system treats that gluten like a deadly pathogen.
It freaks out.
Right, it launches a massive inflammatory attack, and those villi get caught in the friendly fire. The immune response essentially acts like a lawnmower, chopping those tiny tentacles down until the intestinal wall is completely flat and smooth.
So you could be eating an incredibly iron-rich diet, taking massive supplements, but if the villi are destroyed, there is literally nothing to grab the iron. The loading dock is demolished.
Precisely.
And because the text noted that about half of the patients in that celiac study were premenopausal females, it's so easy to see how this gets missed. A doctor looks at a 30-year-old woman, blames her monthly cycle for the low iron, and completely misses that her immune system is destroying her intestines.
Which reinforces the core philosophy of this entire clinical guide. A symptom is an invitation to investigate, not an excuse to prescribe.
That is so true. So we've ruled out the leaks, we've confirmed the stomach acid and the intestinal villi are perfectly healthy. The final frontier of our medical detective work is the supply chain itself, dietary intake.
Though we need to add a massive caveat here. The document states very clearly that in resource-abundant settings, a pure dietary deficiency is incredibly rare as the sole cause of low iron in adults.
Basically, unless you are actively starving, it's really hard to get zero iron from a modern diet.
Exactly.
But the type of diet certainly dictates how hard your body has to work for it. The text breaks down the difference between heme iron and non-heme iron.
Right? Heme iron comes from animal sources. Meat, poultry, fish. It is highly bioavailable, meaning the body easily recognizes it and absorbs it.
And non-heme.
Non-heme iron comes from plants, beans, and fortified cereals. The iron is undeniably present in those foods, but its chemical structure makes it much harder for human digestion to extract.
But the most fascinating part of the diet section wasn't about what foods lack iron. It was about foods that actively sabotage your iron. The dietary blockers.
Yes.
The text lists things like tannins, which are found in tea and red wine, phosphates, phytates, which are in whole grains and seeds, and calcium.
The mechanism here is literally chemical warfare in your gut.
I love that visual.
Instead of a bouncer guarding a door, think of these compounds as chemical magnets. When you consume tannins or calcium alongside iron, they magnetically latch onto the iron molecules in your stomach. They combine to form a brand new, bulky, complex compound.
And I'm assuming that new compound is too big to fit through the doors of the intestinal villi.
Exactly. The complex is physically too massive to pass through the cellular walls into your bloodstream, so your body just excretes the whole package as waste.
Wow.
You consumed the iron, but the blockers dragged it out the back door.
Wait, let me visualize this. So what does this all mean? If I sit down and eat a massive whole grain salad packed with seeds, top it with a bunch of cheese for calcium, and wash it down with a large glass of red wine, am I basically deploying an army of chemical bouncers against whatever iron is in that meal?
From a purely biochemical standpoint, yes, they are linking arms and blocking the exit.
That is wild.
But realistically, if we connect this to the bigger picture, if you are a healthy person with a full iron savings account, that salad and wine aren't going to harm you. The body is resilient.
Good to hear. I love red wine and cheese.
Right. These dietary saboteurs only become dangerous if you are already hovering on the edge of deficiency, or if you consume them in absurd quantities.
Which leads directly to the most wild anecdote in the entire document.
The tea drinker.
Yes. They shared a case study of a patient who drank over 1,500 milliliters of tea every single day for 20 years. That's about 6 large cups of tea daily.
That's a lot of tea.
It is. And this patient developed severe clinical iron deficiency entirely because the massive, relentless wave of tannins in the tea blocked all iron absorption for 2 decades.
And the proof that the tea was the sole culprit is that the deficiency completely resolved as soon as they stopped drinking it. No medical intervention required, just removing the chemical blocker.
Speaking of bizarre dietary habits, we have to talk about pica. The text describes pica as this overwhelming craving to eat non-food items, things like dirt, clay, or ice.
Yes, very common in severe deficiency.
I always thought pica caused iron deficiency because you were eating dirt instead of food, but the document flips that entirely on its head.
It does. Pica is actually a neurological symptom of iron deficiency. When your iron drops to critical levels, your brain essentially panics and tries to remap your cravings to seek out environmental minerals.
So it's a survival mechanism.
It's a primal survival drive. But the tragic irony is the paradox it creates.
Because eating those non-food items, specifically certain types of clays or soils, actually introduces massive amounts of physical blockers into the gut. So your brain's desperate attempt to find minerals ends up completely barricading the digestive tract, starving the body even faster.
It is a brutal biological feedback loop. The body is trying to save itself, but only accelerates the starvation.
It's incredible how complex the system is. And it's not just diet that can lock the door. Some people are born with the padlock already engaged.
Right.
The text mentions a rare genetic mutation called IRIDA.
Yes, iron refractory iron deficiency anemia. This mutation affects a specific gene that regulates a hormone called hepcidin.
Hepcidin, okay.
To understand this, you need to know that hepcidin is basically the body's iron traffic cop. When your body has enough iron, or when you are fighting an infection, hepcidin levels rise and physically shut the gates in the intestines so no more iron can enter.
It's a defense mechanism.
Right. But in patients with IRITA, their genetic mutation causes their hepcidin levels to be permanently spiked. The traffic cop is constantly blowing the whistle and locking the gates.
Jeez.
It does not matter how much iron you feed them or what supplements they take. The door is genetically sealed shut. Thankfully, this is incredibly rare and is typically diagnosed in infants around 1 month old.
Which brings us full circle. We've examined the obvious leaks, the heavy bleeding and major surgeries.
Yeah.
We've illuminated the terrifying hidden leaks like the precancerous adenoma slowly dripping away your reserves. We've seen how broken machinery, destroyed villi, or missing stomach acid leaves iron rusting in the dark. And we've watched chemical bouncers drag iron out of the gut.
The investigation really does cover every system in the body.
So if there's one core takeaway from all of this clinical data, it is a call to action. If your doctor tells you your iron is low, do not just accept a prescription and walk away. Advocate for yourself.
Please do. Ask the hard questions. Review your medication list. Look objectively at your family history. Have you normalized a bleeding disorder?
Right.
Analyze your diet. Insist on finding the root cause, whether it's an occult gastrointestinal issue that needs to be caught immediately or a 20-year extreme tea habit.
Do not just keep bailing water. Find the leak.
Before we wrap up, to leave you with a final thought to ponder, I want to look at a very brief detail mentioned in the source regarding kidney disease.
Oh, yeah, the ESAs.
The text discusses drugs called erythropoiesis-stimulating agents, or ESAs. Doctors give these to kidney patients to stimulate the rapid production of red blood cells. And the drugs work beautifully.
But there's a catch.
A big one. They work so fast and so aggressively that the sudden explosion of new red blood cells instantly drains every drop of stored iron in the body. It forces a complete biological bankruptcy in a matter of days.
It just pulls all the resources at warp speed.
Exactly. And it leaves you wondering about the incredibly fragile, interconnected economy of the human body. In modern medicine and in our own lives, we tend to view our bodily systems in isolation.
We really do.
We try to fix a specific hormone here or force a cellular process there. But the ESA phenomenon proves that the human body is a zero-sum game of resources. Every single biological action demands a biochemical payment. Aggressively fixing one system can instantly crash another.
Wow.
So it begs the question, what other fixes are we making in our daily lives with our diets, our aggressive supplements, our lifestyle hacks that are secretly bankrupting another part of our biology while we aren't looking?
That is a fascinating lens to view our health through. Everything has a cost. Keep investigating your own biology and keep looking for those leaks. We'll see you next time.